Call to order the Planning Commission regular meeting for August 17th, 2023. If the clerk would please call roll. Here. Here. Present. Here. Very good. Love a full house. Next, I'm assuming everyone's had an opportunity to to review the agenda that is in front of you. Do we have any modifications or changes? If not, do we please have a motion?
So moved.
Second. All those in favor, say aye. Yes. Aye. Opposed? Agenda is approved. Also in the packets that were sent to all of us via email this week, they were on the city's website, was the minutes from our regular meeting of July 20th, 2023. They were on page 3 in the packet. Did everybody have a chance to read through those? Was there any changes or comments to them? Seeing none, I'll take a motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
This moves us down to agenda item number 4, which is the public comments. At this time, we will take public comments from anyone that's in the room or who is joining us via Zoom. These public comments need to be addressed to one of the agenda items. If you would like to, please go up to the microphone here in the room or raise your hand on Zoom. State your name, where you're located, and which agenda item you'll be speaking in regards to, and limit your comments to 3 minutes. Is there anyone in the room that would like to speak? No one in the room? Anyone online? Seeing no one online, then we will close public comments. Moving on to item 5, old business, short-term rental task force, a verbal update. I will ask the chair of the short-term rental task force, Holly Anderson, and Ryan Cummins also, if he has anything to add to it, but we'll start off with Holly to give us a summary.
Great, thanks, Steve. We've had 2 meetings since our last Planning Commission meeting. August 3rd, which actually, Steve, you chaired while I was on vacation, focused a lot on discussing sort of the nuisances involved with short-term rentals and discussing ways we might address them. So, policy changes or, other changes to enforcement or policies, fees, to help address some of those. Everything from maybe adding trash cans to short-term rentals, so that would address the trash issue, some suggestions around parking, and the like. So I think it would seem like a very fruitful discussion. It's from really the task force perspective and the input we're getting from the community at the town hall, as well as surveys. There's broad consensus that we can do a lot better job at addressing some of those issues. Today's meeting went through the survey results. McKenna presented a recap of the survey that went out and closed on August 7th. There's clearly a split in the community's perspective on short-term rentals. I think we all knew that. Some differences between residents who live here full-time and those who live here part-time. Again, broad consensus around addressing the nuisance issues, but in terms of considering caps, there's more favorable views of that from full-time residents than part-time residents. McKenna also walked through a memo that they prepared talking about our Tri-Communities master plan and how short-term rentals might fit into some of the policies and goals outlined in that plan. We talked about what the objectives were for short-term rental recommendations coming out of the task force, and are really focused on 3. One is preserving the neighborhood feel, a small town character of the community. Second was supporting our tourism economy. And then the third is doing a better job of addressing, whether through governor enforcement or regulation, some of the nuisance issues. We did have a discussion about, whether we should consider caps, at all. And if so, where, some mixed feelings on whether we should. There is a consensus though among the task force that we would not have, we don't see a need for a citywide cap. No one expressed that, but there will be more consideration or discussion around the possibility of caps in some of the residential neighborhoods. So McKenna's going to come back to us at our next meeting, which is 3 weeks from today, with sort of a recap of, it's really a draft of their report. So sort of what they found, the process, kind of a recap of all of that, laying out the objectives. And then I think, one part will be around the nuisances and enforcement. That's pretty straightforward, or it's more straightforward, certainly. And then give some thinking about how we might approach caps, if at all. Ryan, stuff to add?
I think you covered it very well, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Me too. No, I think you did. There was one comment that came up, which we may be discussing of, if we did look at caps, we may have to go back and also look at our zones. And so it was just kind of prepared everyone that that's part of the review that will be discussed, that maybe on the agenda items, for late this year or 2024. Yeah, take one step at a time on that.
Yep, I actually will add one point, a significant breakthrough. Thank you to our Director of Planning. We finally are getting the data really solid. So based on some work a resident submitted, looking at all the numbers, some preliminary work by McKenna, Ryan really rode herd to get some good data that will help us in our decision-making progress and going forward to be able to maintain that. So a big thank you.
Holly, for those who maybe didn't see the data or was on the meeting, this citywide, we're running about 28%.
Citywide, yep, 28%. The Hill is at about 33%.
That was the highest, followed by Peninsula West at 25%.
At 25%.
Mr. Chair, if I could just a little bit of a point of clarification on that. That's citywide for just residential.
Residential.
Right, exactly. Yep.
Yep.
Yes. Good
Not counting
clarification.
the commercial. Yes, exactly.
Right.
And that is for parcels that have at least one SDR on them. It is not a percentage of the entire short-term rentals, or it does not, as I understand, does not yet encompass the complete number of all short-term rentals in this community.
Correct. If I understand it correctly.
Correct. That analysis compares how many parcels have housing units to how many parcels have at least one short-term rental, registered short-term rental, knowing that some properties may have an accessory dwelling unit that also has a separate short-term rental certificate. There's certain situations where there's multifamily or a mix of uses. So depending on your view on the issue and how you look at it, and you could have some different numbers.
Right, and I think in order to be fully able for any of us to move forward, we not only need to know what percentage of parcels have short-term rentals, but the total number of short-term rentals in our community, so that if you live next door to a parcel that is a short-term rental or one that has 3 short-term rentals on it, I think that's significant in terms of how we move forward.
Fair enough. Yeah, we have the data as far as total number of registered short-term rentals, and that comparison can certainly be made.
And there's so many different ways to look at it, because that's also doesn't include and correct me if I'm wrong, I heard that it doesn't include empty parcels. So the denominator of an empty parcel didn't get added in. So there's some things there. It depends on how you look at it.
Yeah, we had a meeting, Ryan and I, and Steve was unable to join, and the McKenna team had a meeting this week? Yeah, Monday, with, he's got to be like the nation's short-term rental expert. Anyway, a consultant who works with Granicus. He's based in New Orleans, who has done a boatload of research and consulting in this area. His sense was, and I personally agree with it, that parcels can be misleading because it, you know, really people can't rent a parcel. I mean, short-term rentals don't rent out a parcel. And so if we really want to get a sense of the density of short-term rentals, going with dwelling units is a more,
I agree. You just
Okay.
have to know all the rules behind.
yeah,
the statistics.
absolutely, for sure.
It strikes me that we need then I won't say three sets of numbers, because then you have facts, and somebody else's facts, trying not to do that. But I think you need to look at, okay, here's the total number of parcels platted in our city, including empty lots. Here's the percentage for that. Here's the ones that have residential units on it. Here's the number for that. And then a total number of how many STRs we have in gross in the city. And I don't think that should be that cumbersome or impossible to come up with those three sets of numbers.
More challenging than.
Yeah, you would be surprised.
It's not always that straightforward, but I agree that it depends on your policy perspective and how you view it, that all three of those would be, you know, valid ways to view it.
Well, I'm sorry, one more thing, if I may. I'm gonna be looking at this impartially, and I think it's valid to look at, as you raised, there are still a few empty lots in this city. They're disappearing daily. And yet, the other hand, I think I hear people saying, okay, why aren't we talking about the number of parcels that have multiple on it and not counting that in? So I think we really do need, three numbers to look at, or three tables, or three, however that, and again, if you have the number of parcels that have at least one short-term rental, and they don't include the empty parcels, I don't know that it's that much tougher to take the empty number of parcels in town. Is that something that we can't find on our plat, which parcels are empty or which are not? And then just add that number? For example, I mean, you know, it doesn't quite seem rocket science in your brain surgery.
So, you know, resident parcels that are vacant, yes. We have that, at least assessing data, and could certainly provide that. We start getting a little trickier into like how many housing units are on a particular parcel.
And why is that if each one is licensed?
Because if you have, say, I mean, you could have a commercial structure down here, for example, that has a mix of uses. You could have two or three or more dwelling units in the upper level and a retail store on the first floor, and it's all on one parcel.
But
So
do each of those dwelling units have a separate STR license, or are they all encompassed in a single STR license for the city?
So they may have a separate short-term rental certificate, but to know like how many like total housing units is the other side of that. And so if it doesn't have a short-term rental certificate and there's, you know, 3 apartments above the store across the street, like that's not as easy to pull out. And, you know, I've worked with our assessor. We've been, you know, working on those numbers. I mean, we have like an overall census number of how many housing units we have across the city, but like individual housing units without like going one by one and trying to sort that out hasn't been as easy to do.
You're saying the problem is that we have units being rented out that do not have STR licenses?
No, what I'm saying is that
Because your report shows a lot of following up on that every month, and so,
correct. My understanding of your question was that you were asking about how many why we wouldn't be able to tell how many housing units are on a particular parcel. So that's
yes,
the issue.
my question.
Without going like one by one, we don't have like an easy way to just tell how many housing units are on a particular parcel without actually looking at each particular circumstance.
And
Right.
I'm sorry, my follow-up question was, so that if you have a parcel that has multiple STRs on let's take a residence that has a freestanding and has an accessory in their building. So they could have 2 short-term rentals on their parcel, correct?
You said a single family home and an ADU?
Yes.
Correct.
They could have 2 short-term rentals on their property.
Yeah.
Are those covered under a single license or 2 licenses?
So each dwelling unit would have to have its separate short-term rental certificate, but then there's another layer to that with our short-term rental regulations, that the ADU and the single-family dwelling have to be rented together under a single contract, or we're getting into provisions where they could rent it, it's owner occupied, you know, with special land use approval from the planning commission.
Isn't your short-term rental license number going to be larger than 180?
It is.
Correct.
But Mark,
That's just for residential.
Know what that number is?
We do know how many registered short-term rental certificates we have. That 180 is based on residential zoning districts, and it's based on just parcels that have at least one.
I am trying.
Right. We can certainly
Mark,
discuss for
yes.
the data and.
Just-
and-
Mark, if I
in
could
detail,
ask,
so.
because the task force will make recommendations to us. If there's a recommendation for us to discuss, caps, then we will, look at it at that time in more detail and try to answer all the questions. Well, we can always look at it on our own, but we, try to follow that, but just out of time tonight, let's try to move on. If you do have a pretty heavy agenda.
Yeah, Chairman Manzo, just had one quick question about numbers. Numbers can do all kinds of things with numbers. I'm thinking we're not the first community to have to look at how to measure the actual quantity of short-term rentals. So I would expect that this has probably been discussed with McKenna to look, based on their experience and others, there's probably not a standard that exists, would be my guess, based on my knowledge of this, but just so we're not an outlier when we end up measuring this and presenting it.
Right.
That we
We-
come in with you understand what I'm?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm not saying that we're not, I'm just, that's
Yeah,
kind of how I look
we
at
have.
it.
Absolutely. So this, with the update? Very good. And we will move to our new business. First item on new business is the 7 parcels on Sugar Hill Court here for a formal site plan review. As we open this up, I will ask our planning and zoning director to kind of give us an update of this being on the agenda and what our task is here this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before you tonight is a formal site plan review application, as you indicated, for the Vine Street Cottages project on Sugar Hill Courts. So kind of a lengthy history related to this project, and maybe I'll save some of the thunder for the applicant's representative to present anything in particular that she wants to touch on. She provided a lot of documents for you to review in your packet this evening. So this project goes back several years. It was before the Planning Commission. Several years ago, there was a land division application that was brought to the Planning Commission. At that time, it was tabled for some more information, and that was subsequently indefinitely tabled. And it's not exactly clear in reading the minutes exactly what was being looked for at that particular time, other than the motion essentially said that it was tabled indefinitely. So since that time, the applicants continued to work on their project. Worked with the previous zoning administrator on installing a street and water and sewer infrastructure in the area. That information was reviewed by the city engineer. The fire department was involved with that. In 2021, there was approval given to go ahead with that portion of the project. Was a permit issued by the prior zoning administrator. Since that time, the applicant submitted 2 separate land division applications. We spent a significant amount of time reviewing those in accordance with what is required under the Land Division Act to approve the land division requests. Worked with our legal counsel very closely and reviewing a lot of questions that were raised about both of those applications. Determination was made that both land division applications did meet the Land Division Act requirements and all of our local requirements as well. So the applicant's at the point where they're ready to move forward with more formal zoning approvals to start building on some of these lots. So there's a provision in the zoning ordinance that essentially allows for the zoning administrator to exercise some discretion and requiring formal site plan review. And so I've exercised that in this particular case. It wasn't another mechanism under your formal site plan review ordinance that necessarily required formal site plan review. But in this case, given that it's, you know, in a critical dune area, the natural resources that are involved, you know, some additional density being added to this area, I felt that it was appropriate to have the planning commission and you as our 7 citizen planners in the community, to review, and make sure you're in agreement that the zoning requirements, are met at this point, in time. So the staff's recommendation is a conditional approval. You can see a few, conditions, in the staff report. Each individual, lot, once it's ready to, has plans developed, will still require a separate zoning permit application where we're gonna look at, you know, heights, lot coverage, setbacks that, you know, so happy to answer any questions that you have. And as I indicated, the applicant's representative is, or I'm sorry, the owner's representative is here this evening to present as well.
Yeah, before we bring the owners up, I just, if you could touch upon, because there has been here just this afternoon, somebody who questioned whether or not the parcels were entitled to a land split. How did you and legal counsel determine that they were entitled to a land split?
So the Land Division Act is a rather extensive
Land Division.
documents and then we have certain provisions in our ordinances that have to be looked at as well. And so we had to take a look at the parent parcel, you know, what was in place in 1997, the number of divisions that were allowed, determine if they were in fact allowed. We looked at a lot of documents that had been filed over the years and the number of divisions that went to different subsequent owners. So we followed that trail, I think, very closely. It took a significant amount of time. I think the owners can attest to that, that they were hoping that we would have done that a little faster even, but we spent a significant amount of time making sure that we were comfortable that the Land Division Act and our local ordinance requirements were in fact followed. And so both land division applications were in fact approved.
Very good. And those were approved. It's in our notes in April and June of this year, correct?
Correct. Lots, correct. Yep.
Anybody else have any questions for Ryan before we ask?
Mr. Chair, I just have a question about the wording on the agenda. I don't see the word public hearing with respect to this site plan review. Is that correct? We're not doing a public hearing with respect to this?
Correct. Site plan review doesn't require a public hearing, just a special land.
Just wanted to be clear. Thank you.
Yep.
For myself primarily. Thank you.
Yeah, I noticed that too, so I appreciate that. I was curious.
I have one question. So the letter we received from Mr. Medler, I'm assuming all of the points, I mean, is our legal counsel, I'm assuming looked at all of the points in this letter and determined that we're good to go.
That's correct, Commissioner Anderson. The initial letter that was submitted to us several months ago, our legal counsel reviewed. And then the letter that was submitted today was reviewed as well.
Thank you.
Ryan, I just had one process question and it goes to another correspondence we got today and the question about public hearing. We've started the review, we've opened this up. If we feel like we need to afford ourselves and the public more time and want to conclude it at a future meeting, is that an option?
That's during the deliberation, we
Okay.
would have the ability to. Go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah, I mean, if you feel like you have certain further questions or need further information, you certainly have the option to table a request.
Thank you.
Anything else before we bring them up? And if we could, let's please bring up representatives for either the owners or the representatives for the owners.
Good evening, Planning Commission. I'm Suzanne Schultz with Progressive AE, representing Mr. Brad Rothschafer of Mosaic, and I'm accompanied by Jeff Barr with Naderveld. So if there's any engineering questions, we can also answer that. And Jack was involved more with the historical aspects of it. So if there's any insight needed for that, we can also respond to it. For site plan review, one of the functions is just to ensure that it complies with all the provisions of the zoning ordinance. And so hopefully you were able to go through the packet that was provided to show that, in fact, with the lot splits, the parcels do meet all the requirements of the zoning ordinance. As was mentioned, the private street was reviewed and approved by the city's engineer of record and the fire chief. That's now been constructed with all the water and sewer infrastructure underneath, including the laterals to service the lots. And then we have those lots. Single-family homes are permitted by right in the residential zone district. And so we're really just simply looking at 7 lots for 7 single-family homes to be placed on lots that are in existence and served by water and sewer. And I don't know if you have any questions for me.
I have one question. So when the Eagle issued permits, they noted several things like, not filling wetland areas and, how do you monitor, how will that be monitored to ensure that since it is a dune area that we need to be extra careful with? What are the mechanisms for ensuring that all of the Eagle stipulations are met?
Jack with Niederveld, thank you. So we submitted an application, actually 8 applications to Eagle, 1 for the road construction, and then 7 for each individual lot. So each individual lot was issued a permit by Eagle for a specific house footprint, specific driveway location, how we're managing stormwater on there, what trees we can cut and can't cut, specific boundaries of disturbance, if you will. So any variations of that, if somebody comes along and says, well, I want to have a little bit bigger house over here, we would have to go back to Eagle and amend that permit. So what we got the permits for the 7 lots, that has to get built, or if there's a customization of that, then that has to get reviewed and approved in that amended permit. Does that answer your question?
Sort of. Just some of the provisions, the, dredged and evacuated materials need to be disposed in an upland site. No fill or excess soil should be placed in any wetland. So for those kinds of provisions, again, just how is it monitored so that they are adhered to?
Yeah, so Eagle will do a post-construction inspection, but the rest of those are the honor system. So they impose those conditions, just like the zoning ordinance. There's setbacks required. If somebody decides not to follow the setback and you go out and say, hey, you didn't follow the setbacks, well, that's a problem. So it's an honor system until somebody doesn't do what they're supposed to do in the conditions, and then Eagle takes enforcement action.
Thank you.
You had mentioned the road is now complete. When was that completed? Because I'm just asking on, because like in one of the recommendations, it talks about no occupancy permits be granted until the asphalt paving is completed, inspected, and approved. So has that occurred or has that not occurred?
It has occurred. We met out there with Chris Mantles, the fire department, and Police and Vandenbrink, your engineer of record, and we've walked the site. We had to make a couple of repairs to make the fire department happy with width of the road, and those have all been done, and they've accepted the construction.
And that
road is
occurred when?
Pardon me?
And that occurred when?
2021,
Oh.
2021.
I'll just to clarify on that, it would have been earlier this year was when there was a recent inspection. There was concerns about the width issues, and perhaps they have been repaired since that time. But I think this is where that condition is coming from, is just to make sure that it is in fact, the width that was approved initially by the fire department, and that those repairs were made.
Yeah, the road was completed the previous year, and then this spring, the fire department finally did their inspection, and they noticed a couple areas that the road was too narrow. So we've made revisions to fix that, and I think that's one of the conditions of the
Correct.
permit.
Yep.
So you'd have to, the fire department would come back out just to do a final sign off.
Yeah, yeah.
I have 2 questions. One, I think I know the answer. Why are you recommending, or the fire department's recommending, fire suppression systems on only lots 3, 4, 5, and 6, and not 1, 2, and 7?
Yeah, so 1, 2, and 7 are close to close to the road where there's existing hydrants in the lots. Fire code says that if you're not within 400 feet, 300 feet of a hydrant, you either have to extend a hydrant or provide the structure with fire suppression. So in this case, we said we'll put fire suppression in those structures that are further away.
I didn't notice the hydrant. Is it on Vine Street?
Yeah,
Okay.
there's one right near the entrance.
I drove right past it. And the other question, just aesthetics, if I were buying lots 4 or 5, Why did you not do a cul-de-sac, a circle at the end of the street so that people won't be pulling into driveways 4 or 5?
Yeah, it was a space thing, so the cul-de-sac for the fire code has to be 60 feet of pavement, so it ends up looking like a helipad at the end there. So instead, the fire department has the option of doing what they call a hammerhead, so provide them with a place to turn around. It's just a different method of accomplishing the same thing.
And that's the one further, like halfway through the,
Yeah,
gotcha.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Since we have, is it Jeff? No, I was Jeff. Oh, Jack, I mean. Jack, wait, which one is Jeff and which one's Jack? He's Jack. I'm sorry. Got the names mixed up. You have the history of the property, she said. Can you walk me through the history of the property real quick?
A gentleman who owned the parcel. We went through, worked with Jack to do planning and put the road in and, yeah, that's really how Brad found it. He do the development of the parcel. So we came in with some planning for some lots and any specifics you guys want?
So was it
No, it's-
originally part of, the Presbyterian camp? I wasn't clear.
Yes, it's
Okay.
back parcel of Presbyterian camp. I don't think we've ever been part of it, yes.
we worked on, I worked for Niederveld. We also did the Presbyterian Camp project. So Paul Hewley, who ended up buying the Presbyterian Camp, he developed the camp property, all the frontage along the lake. That's a mixture of land divisions and site condominium parcels. This parcel was part of land that the camp owned. It wasn't contiguous with the camp. So just had this land over here. He didn't want to do any more development. He's building his house back there and he was kind of done. So in 2016, Brad entered into a purchase agreement with Paul Hewley to buy this portion of that remnant camp property. And then from 2016 to 21, we worked on everything we've been talking about, approvals and permits and construction, and that's kind of how we got here. So.
Yes, absolutely.
Perhaps I didn't understand what I read, or else I haven't been listening closely enough. Could someone just briefly explain to me what happened in these interims, why it stopped?
Didn't really stop. So in 2016, Brad entered a purchase agreement with Paul Hewley to buy the property. From 2016 to 2019, we were working with Eagle to see if we could get the critical dune permits.
Right.
That takes a long time. So it took us 3 years to figure out what this property could be, figure out how the lots could lay out, working with the previous zoning administrator on what it could be, and working with Eagle. Then 2019, we started working on more of the details of the construction of the roads and utilities. That takes about a year to go through those and get approvals from your engineer and the fire department and everything else. And then we started construction in 2020. And we started at a bad time of the year, so it took a little longer to get the road built and whatnot, so. Materials,
That little thing.
couldn't find materials or contractors to do it, so it kind of got stalled out, but, yeah.
Provided. Really the third paragraph, I think, is kind of for us, the crux of it is that we directed to go to planning commission. They went to planning commission. Then at the direction of city staff, they're directed to undergo engineering review with the city engineer, the utilities in the private streets, secure fire department approval, obtain critical dune permits, and submit a security deposit to cut into Vine Street for the utilities. And the developer has done all of those things. So then, to go through DEQ review, it takes a while. I'm sorry, Eagle. And so it's just a matter of the past 5 years, they've been progressively working on that.
Well, and you also have the DNR, I think. That's helpful, thank you. It's just that, and I have sympathy with the gentleman in Lindsay who wrote, we got the package on Tuesday, and, it's just a lot to absorb in the, because we don't sit around waiting for the package to arrive, as you can all appreciate. Anyway, so it's just a lot to absorb and take in and understand. So thank you for the explanation. I appreciate that.
Plenty of detail.
And-
There's a lot.
There
there.
was,
There's a lot of detail inside, and I think it's maybe like for me, not to speak, because I had to call Ryan and talk about it. Because when we look at what was presented back in 2019, it's different what's being presented in front of us today. 2019 was for the ability, I think, to do the land divisions, which they ended up tabling. Correct, and the road in there, so they tabled it to kind of have the investigation. That's all kind of already behind us at this point. It's already, the land divisions have happened, parcels have been identified. And we're tasked today to kind of look at it from a site plan review of the actual 7 sites. And do we feel comfortable that if they present a plan to build on these sites in the following all the rules that they've kind of laid out with where the home would be plotted and that which would be administratively signed off on with Ryan. Is that something that we are comfortable with? Is there anything in the site plan that we would, find objections to or would want to deliberate about?
Thank you. Thank you for being here this evening. Do we know how many current homes are in this area? And I say from Vine Street all the way back, including this private road? How many homes are already back there before we even talked about
the-
You know,
new?
there's none in that. I mean, if you look at the
No,
topography of the area,
No, I understand, but at the bottom of Park Street with Vine, as you go up, how many homes are actually in that area right now? Do we know?
I can read,
think
off
there's-
fine, maybe 4, 5, 6 being built. And then, but then there are a bunch of just, for context, because I'm very close to this development, geographically, there are the homes then on Park Street in front of, or
Right.
kind of parallel to it, abut it. So the lots, so anyways, I think 6 back on Vine, but then there are probably 3 or 4 kind of in front of it, that abut it
Be on Park Street.
on Park Street.
Yeah, thank you. The reason I asked the question is, that area is very tight to begin with. I've spent a lot of time back there myself over the years, hiking in Presbyterian Camp, and the Mount Baldhead Challenge actually used to come down, it maybe still comes down that road. My concern is that, especially with the conversation regarding short-term rentals, we don't know what these properties, these homes are gonna be used for, and they could potentially become short-term rentals. The intensity of traffic, especially, that's a very hard corner coming off Park Street. Coming on Vine and coming down from Vine, even if you're familiar with it, it's a tricky place to drive and the intensity of traffic and the intensity of use back in that area. The reason why there's so much involved with this is because of the critical nature of this area, right? And from my perspective, and one of the letters that came in today mentions this specifically, is that I would like to see additional information regarding engineering and traffic studies in this area. Because you had 7 additional properties which could potentially become short-term rentals, which could increase your traffic by exponentially, is going to create some issues. Just usage issues and getting off the road, getting in there, getting out. I just can't imagine how intense that's going to be, not just for the people that live there, but the people that may come and enjoy their homes as well. Just if they become single-family homes, you're doubling the amount of traffic that's gonna be coming in and out of there. And one of the letter writers today mentioned that wasn't done. I would ask that that be done, that in engineering studies, so we have a better sense of actually what impact this is going to have on the current residents as well as potential residents.
I missed it. Which letter writer asked for?
unfortunately, we did not get any of the letters, so we don't know how to
No,
respond.
And,
Yeah, they
No.
came in very late today,
Very late
unfortunately.
Yeah.
yeah,
I would say with the traffic study, I mean, with 7 residential units, just as you discussed with the short-term rentals, that's really an ordinance question,
That-
on how you want to
that-
regulate those.
that is, but I have to imagine all scenarios for this area as a planning commissioner, and 2, is the impact it's gonna have on the residents that are already there as well as my community. And I appreciate from a increasing the use of the property, but I'm also concerned about the impact it's gonna have on just the livability of the area. And state agencies have the same concern, Eagle and DNR as well. The same concern about making sure that it's, taken care of appropriately. I don't feel I have enough information to make a good decision about this evening without some of this additional information so I can better evaluate it.
I would ask, I guess, and like, you know, if you'd like a traffic study, like what is that, I guess, going to help show you? I mean, the short-term rentals are permitted use and single-family dwellings are permitted use, and the size of the lots are, I mean, they're created, they're created through a land division process. So if the uses are permitted, I guess we would maybe be specific about what is the traffic study going to accomplish? Like what in the end would, you know,
Part of it may be a city responsibility. That's a good
What, I'm
question.
sorry?
Part of it may be a city responsibility. That street was not designed, this area wasn't designed for this use. The city may have some responsibility to improve the intersection at Vine and Park in order to increase the safety for people going in and out of there.
Frankly, I
understand where
think
I'm
it's
coming from?
unsafe right now as
Well,
it
that's-
is
that's-
personally, so.
That's
I
where I'm
would-
going with it. So the city may have some responsibility because Vine is a platted public street. The city may have some responsibility to improve the intersection with approval of a project like this, which will increase the traffic. So my idea would be to get just like a standard traffic study to say, here's what the impact's going to be with cars coming in and out. It's a very tight road as well. This is just gonna create more. Just gonna create more. I don't know how else
Can
to
a
describe
traffic
it.
study also look at, like, a stop sign should be here, crosswalk should be here, you know, those sorts of things? I don't know, just,
That's more the city
Yeah, that,
as opposed to.
okay.
that,
Yeah,
And
I guess,
part of the
does
zoning
that fall under
for
the
that,
purview of this group body? I don't know that, how it falls under the purview of this
we would
body.
have to review the zoning.
yeah, and there's actually in the standard, it talks about sidewalks and the needs for pedestrian and so forth, and as, I don't have it right up in front of me on my screen, but it does speak to that it was, I don't want to speak without looking, and it does talk about that aspect of it. The traffic study is in my opinion, vehicular traffic and safety for that area as well as the intersection of Park and Vine. It's just going to get more busy with this. And I'm not saying that means I oppose it. I'm just saying I'd like more information to see the city may have some responsibility and it's not in the purview of the planning commission, but the traffic study may come back and say, in order to make this safe, the city's gonna have to do this, X, Y, Z, whatever the case may be. The traffic coming in and off Park Street is gonna be.
Item E is where it says there shall be provided pedestrian circulation system which is separated from the vehicle. Which we know that Park Street doesn't have that, but in order to ensure public safety, special pedestrian measures such as crosswalk, it goes on. And then the comment by the
And
zoning was, the pedestrian and vehicle traffic generated by these two home sites will be minimal. There's high controls nearby with the interface is minimal, if at all, with vehicle traffic. Therefore, the planning commission may comment just say no, you don't find this thing.
Mr. Chair, if you're all right with it, I mean, Dave Drosik's on, tonight too. He was the author of, kind of the primary staff review and report. Perhaps he could kind of weigh in at least on with his professional thoughts, at least give you some insight. Certainly you have, individual commissioners can disagree with us. That's totally fine. But, Dave, are you on?
Yes, I'm here.
Do you have any thoughts on this particular topic related to, traffic and whether or not,
Yes, well, this is a by right use. It was the planning director's discretion to send it to the planning commission. If it meets zoning requirements, it has to be approved. So my opinion is that it's something that meets all zoning requirements. The road is approved. The permits are in place. I know if it's a concern, I think that can still be something that's addressed, but it is a by right use and zoning requirements have been met.
I guess this is actually a point of education, I think. I hear what Dave is saying, but I thought we looked at these factors, which are rather subjective, and that was within our purview. So I guess I had a different view of how we look at this. These factors are about what we looked at.
You're correct. I mean, that's what you're making a decision on, are these site plan review standards, and you do have a right to have, you know, if you have a right to have an individual thought on that. I think, you know, with the road already being built and city right of way is already there, I mean, certainly if there's, you know, general feedback from the planning commission and concern about reviewing this particular intersection and you know, certainly with staff, you know, we can, you know, put this on the city engineer's radar and you know, take a look at the increased you know, volumes and provide some recommendations. I mean, the city engineer was involved with reviewing their road plans, was well aware of the projects and, you know, the types of uses that were going to be involved. And at that time, didn't flag any particular improvements that needed to be made to, you know, Vine Street or Park Street in that particular area.
If I may, I have a question for you. Do I understand correctly that Vine Street cottages will be on a private road? This is not going to become an additional city street? Okay. To me, that addresses in part the idea of whether we need sidewalks or not, because I mean, it's a private road, private property, private road. The other question I had was a more basic question. All of these lots will be connected to city sewer and water, is that correct? We're not gonna have any septic, we're not gonna have any wells, okay. Because I think Gingras has some septic and wells and.
They have septic. Yep.
Yeah, okay. The idea of increased traffic, I mean, where you go with that is then potentially widening Vine Street or something along those lines, and then you've got the whole critical dunes and for the benefit of the petitioners and anybody who's on with us, I don't find anywhere in either of our two communications the mention of a concern about increased traffic or a request for a traffic study. I just want to make the record clear on that. It's certainly a point that you can raise as a commissioner of the planning commission, but to say that it is representing either of these two documents, I think is incorrect, and you can correct me if you find it somewhere. But otherwise, I'm perfectly willing to proceed. I've read your opinion, and I rely on the opinion of our experts as well as our zoning administrator, and think that I agree with, and personally, I agree that the standards have been met.
Thank you, Mark.
One
CJ?
follow-up to that, the way I heard it is each of these plans will come to him administratively after the fact anyways. We're just saying the outline is being presented, which
Correct.
meets the rules that are called out.
So when the plans are submitted to Ryan, they'll look and make certain that
They follow
the
the
home
lines.
is within the plotted footprint. And that,
And as explained, if it's not, then they have to go back to the Eagle and do all the other things.
correct. You know, and then in regards, you know, Park Street is definitely an issue. It's not part of this. But it definitely, you know, is an issue that we probably, you know, needs to be looked at. We've talked about that for a while. We know all the issues with trying to figure out like where would you widen it? Where would you put sidewalks? You know, 7 additional homes in that area, given the overall size of the area, you know, it will increase a certain degree of traffic in my opinion, but at the same time, I don't, you know, it's not like we're doubling, you know, the number of the homes over in that area. But
Well, we're doubling the homes certainly back
on
on
that Vine Street, correct. But that could have been said years ago when they were developing the Manchester, a part of Peninsula West, when they first went in, they were talking about, oh, we're gonna go from 1 parcel to 9. And the only way to get to it was off of Campbell, you know, which is a different street, but there's, so again, I'm just expressing from my opinion that I think, you know, I just remember when we were doing, you know, our classes, you know, for the, you know, for citizen planner, why I was spacing that, you know, just like David had said, is that based on our current zoning, if it's met all requirements, or we believe that it, you know, has, you know, that it would be something we should approve, but again, that is one of the requirements and we can kind of discuss it. But I'm comfortable. Other comments?
Yeah, Chairman Mans, I would, and I think I've heard this as a subtext this evening amongst the commissioners, is that, this is a tremendous amount of information for us to evaluate and review and kind of absorb in such a short amount of time, to feel comfortable that there may be other questions that we may have as citizen planners around this application. And that's no disrespect meant to the applicants. It's just the ability to process this information. And, I'm responding to one thing, that comment, but from a letter writer, there may be other things as I study this that it may come up and say, what about this and what about that? The fact of the matter that it's been, for various reasons, has not been brought to the planning commission until now. From my perspective, for another 30 days to really kind of evaluate this from an individual planning commissioner standpoint would be appreciated. So I can feel like I make a good decision. I do agree with Commissioner Lachey that our planning commissioner and also David Jurasik do a great job presenting this information to us. It's concise. However, the nuances of this and the intensity of this and the location of this, I pause.
I would just say Commissioner Gardner, with, all due respect, as a former planning director, I probably wouldn't have taken this to the planning commission because I don't know what you would change or for the site plan review, because the lots are there, the street is there. I'm not sure what else we would change under site plan review with a by right use. So that's the question with tabling it, is the reason the documentation was all provided that's in there that shows the history of the property and the street and the Eagle permits and all that was just really to show that we had dotted all of our I's and crossed all of the T's to be compliant with the direction that was provided by the city to make sure that we were meeting all of the requirements of the ordinance.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you. And I'm not necessarily questioning the by right use. It's more of the impact it's going to have on my community and that neighborhood from a long-term standpoint, 30, 40 years down the road.
Yeah, I agree, Russ, and I have two thoughts. One is that give me pause. One is when I read Jim Lindsay's note, I think about factor A for our site plan review, which is that all elements of the plan shall be harmoniously and efficiently organized in relation to topography, et cetera. This site will be so developed as to not impede the normal and orderly development and improvement of surrounding property for uses permitted in this chapter. And I'm sympathetic that it's hard to evaluate that if the surrounding properties don't feel like they've had time to think it through. So I'm sympathetic to that. I also just want to point out that under our own planning commission bylaws, we do require, as I read them, 5 days advance notice of materials. I completely appreciate how busy everyone is and why we only got 2 days, but that just gives me pause as well. So
This was submitted about 5 weeks prior to your meeting.
right, we only got it 2 days ago, though. Yeah.
Yep. They could, if there is questions, I don't know if we can bring the packet up and show, I think that there's one site plan in particular in there that shows the site grading, where the toe of the slope is, and the position of the houses and lots. And I think that probably illustrates the best kind of how it was laid out with intention to be as environmentally sensitive as possible, given the situation of the property. And I don't know, Director Cummins, if that's possible.
Yeah. Which page number is that in?
It's after the text. I want to say it's probably,
About the overall site plan.
yeah, the overall. So there's the overall, there's the first one that shows just the topography, and then there's one that just shows the lots, and then the third one that shows the topography and the lots and the toe of the
So
slope.
it's gonna be page 51.
51? Yes, it's. And I've got the green and blue.
Yep, and that's. and Jack can certainly weigh in too, but the blue area, the blue line shows the toe of the slope, for the dunes. And then you have the lots and where the homes are located. So the blue is the disturbance area is shown in the green, with the area, and then just how the homes are nestled in there to be as sensitive as possible. As we mentioned, the street is there, the laterals are in, and so it's just where those connections are. You can see the turnaround that was discussed with the fire department, and where that's, compliant according to the fire chief. And Jack, I don't know if you have
And again, this is something when, you know, everything that's in here, you know, shows that we are, you know, not building in any of the critical areas, that it's meeting this minimum parcel size, it's meeting the ratio of building, you know, of the actual building to the parcel, setbacks, are met, all the things that are required in the actual zoning, you know, for this parcel. Regarding the neighbors and the timing, this project has been going on for a multiple number of years. You know, and so I think it's, you know, I hear what they are saying in regards to, you know, some of the comments, but again, it goes back to, you know, if it's allowed in our zoning, we have to really consider that as what is driving the decisions that are to be made.
Mr. Chair, absent hearing the motion to table, I would make a motion to approve the site plan as submitted based upon findings of this report, all standards of approval having been satisfied, approval being recommended with the following conditions. One, zoning and building permits shall be issued for each site in accordance with the city's standard administrative review procedures and applicable zoning requirements. Two, no occupancy permit will be granted until asphalt paving is completed, inspected, and approved by the fire district. And three, that lots 3, 4, 5, and 6 will have fire suppression systems installed in accordance with NFPA 13D.
Second.
Having received a motion and a second, we then move to go straight to vote, right? Yeah, it's not deliberation anymore. So if we can have the clerk do a roll call vote.
If you want to have further discussion on the motion, you certainly can.
Any discussion on the,
I'm not comfortable that voting yes, given the way the timing played out for this. I would just share my view. Happy to take the vote.
do you feel that the standards have been met per the zoning?
I don't feel like I really have enough information from an input, particularly from residents on the factors, on A and F in particular. I think Russ made great points about the traffic, and then I'm concerned that at least one adjacent property, I know there's several other adjacent property owners. I don't even know if they got, I thought we typically sent flyers given the short notice for this. I don't even know if they are aware, frankly.
Yeah, if I could, Mr. Chair, I mean, again, this isn't scheduled for a public hearing because it's not a special land use. The uses are permitted.
Right.
So, formal site plan reviews aren't subject to, notice requirements like they are for public
Okay.
hearings.
Right.
So there's no notice for those
Okay.
within 300 feet, no paper notice that was required.
They won't get the flyer because it's not a hearing.
Not a public
Correct.
hearing. And there's nothing that's outside of what's allowed in our current zoning for that area. And the land divisions of the plots have already been approved. So now it's just a matter of approving, you know, do these recommended homes, you know, meet the zoning, which is setbacks, lot coverage, size of lots.
No, well, I'm looking at the factors for site plan review. So if I'm looking at the wrong thing, please correct me, but it's the factors that I guess give me pause. Don't disagree with anything anyone's saying, but I'm happy to take the vote. You know,
And just for what it's worth, because I'm on the city's email list, even though there was not specific notice sent to adjacent property owners or nearby property owners, anybody who's on the city's email list got notice of the planning commission meeting tonight, so.
right.
And we had public comment earlier with no public comments in regards to this agenda item.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, man, I would just, I agree with, Commissioner Broker. Sufficiently satisfies the zoning ordinance, but there's a number of questions and lack, but at least for me personally, just not enough time to kind of absorb and understand this for looking at other things that may impact my decision as a planning commissioner. These are not black and white.
I'm sympathetic, to Commissioner Gopher and Gardner, in terms of timing, but, in terms of our responsibility as commissioners, that if we're satisfied that the proposal meets the ordinances and the standards, we should approve. And so, and I did find enough time this week to go through this, although I would encourage us to
Okay.
be more considerate in the future in terms of timing.
Any other comments? Otherwise, I'm going to call the vote.
I guess I want to go on record too, saying that I'm sympathetic to the time, but we'll support the motion, so. anyway.
So clerk, please call the roll.
Anderson? Yes. Badger?
Yes.
Broker? No. Gardner?
No.
Summer? Yes. Boucher?
Yes.
And Mayhew.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda, which does require a public hearing, is our discussion on the brewery and restaurant for 248 Culver Street. It starts on our packet on page 210.
Just a moment, let me get there.
Oh,
Let me get there.
We really wanted to be
there.
able to like go through every page of the site plan review.
Let me get there.
And it's- But before we ask the applicant and that to come forward, once everybody gets on the 210 page, yeah, we can have the zoning and planning director just kind of give us a little history on this, and then we will ask you guys to speak.
Certainly, Mr. Chair, so the applicants have applied for a special land use approval and site plan review for a brewery and restaurant at 248 Culver Street. As
Brian, I should probably open the public hearing first, shouldn't I?
certainly can, Mr. Chair.
Only because, sure, that's first item in public hearing. Sorry about that, everyone. I will call to order the public hearing for our agenda item number 2, the restaurant and brewery for 248 Culver Street. Now that the public hearing has been opened, I will now ask our zoning administrator to give us a summary of. All right.
Yes, the applicants have applied for special land use approval for a brewery and restaurant at 248 Culver Street. As most of you are, I'm sure, well aware, for many years, a restaurant operated at this particular property. The site has been vacant for some time now, although there's a new owner who's kind of bringing some life back to the space, and he's working with these folks on their brewery and restaurant project. And so because there's the brewery, distilleries, wineries are actually a special land use, and then the restaurant use is changing in some way from what it was before. They're applying for special land use approval for both of those items. So a number of different factors to consider. The list of those standards is listed in your meeting packet, and some comments provided on each. Other than that, Mr. Chair, the staff recommendation is approval. Other than that, Mr. Chair, I think I'd probably turn over to the applicants to kind of present their project in greater detail.
Fantastic. Who will speak on behalf of the applicant?
Wesley Noble. I'm partner in the application process. My partner, Brooks, which is joining virtually, Brooks Twist. And so as a general overview, as Ryan said, our applications essentially to renovate the former Toulouse restaurant at, 248 Culver Street, and realize a new brewery and restaurant, that we've envisioned to produce craft beer. Also, with the intent of applying for a distiller's license so that we have the option of producing and selling spirit-based beverages there in addition. And so the idea is to equally cater to the local market and also equally the tourist market, which is of course quite heavy in the seasonal basis, and provide a year-round experience for the patrons. So, my partner and I have 25 years industry experience, and we just want to utilize our skills and blend in with the local community and serve the patrons that are essentially already existing in the Saugatuck area. Again, as mentioned, the corner of that part of the community has been a bit vacant for some time. The idea was to sort of revitalize that vacant corner to harmonize the commercial experience for foot traffic and other patrons in the area, and help support and sort of facilitate the overall creative experience that Saugatuck has to offer in the artistic and creative areas. So, and of course as it being an alcohol manufacturer and retailer, we have an obligation, a community and social obligation to encourage safe and responsible consumption of alcoholic beverages, and to comply with all state of Michigan Serve Safe regulations, and focus on the benefits of the community. Our business decisions will be centered around that the community and the employees of our business come first and in front of our other business decisions. So, in a nutshell, that summarizes what our intentions are and why we think that it would fit in with Saugatuck.
Thank you, and I thank you guys for being here this evening. I'm probably like many of the people in town, I've looked at that property for years and wondered why it still sat there empty and, hasn't been utilized to its fullest extent. So I'm thrilled that we're seeing at least something coming before us that would utilize the full property. Now, the current tenant that has that corner, is that just a short-term lease? That clothing, or
Excuse me.
isn't there a tenant in there currently on, like a clothing store, or I don't know what it is?
You're talking about the facing Culver.
Yes, that's in the same building.
But it will remain, I believe.
It-
You're around it.
You're building around it?
It will remain. There's two separate
Okay.
addresses.
When I was looking at this, I thought it was the entire building that Toulouse once had.
Sorry, this area you're speaking of is right here.
Got it. Okay, sorry. And then questions for the applicant before I open up for public comments.
I did have one question about, I noticed the description included a condominium, the condos above it look like? Is that just kind of an FYI, I assume?
It's an FYI. The condos would not be part of our lease agreement or any related to our business whatsoever.
Okay.
And they're currently unoccupied.
How many units are upstairs? You know?
Excuse me?
How many units are upstairs, you know?
I-
Two.
Thank you.
And
Is-
Todd and Kim Martinson are, building owners, joined us here tonight as well.
Very good.
I was just waiting.
Is there anything in the brewing process that is flammable or brisk to the units above? Did it be different than having a restaurant?
There isn't anything in within the brewing process that's, creates some inflammable, materials any more than a restaurant.
A restaurant. Okay.
I actually had a similar question along those lines. Does it create fumes of any kind? That's like smell, restaurant smell?
That popped in my next question.
It better. It's a brewing beer, it better.
There is an amount of fermentation gases that are created anytime that you have a brewery or beer or wine fermentation. But truly on the scale that it's not I guess this is a matter of opinion. In my opinion, it's not any sort of an offensive smell. I think
Okay.
it smells, it's a fruity, yeasty aroma similar to rising bread, if you will. And the scale that which our capacity allows there would, my opinion, forms I don't think any passerby would be able to experience it, but I think it's quite a selling point if a visitor of your establishment is able to smell that.
How many barrels? How big is your barrel system?
The intention is to get an 8 to 10 barrel per batch
Okay.
brewing system.
And the current craft brewing craft brewing laws only allow you to serve your product, right? You can't sell, in other words, you won't have a full bar unless you have a distillery as well. You're limited to serving your product, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
And we don't have where intention is to secure a microbrewer's license with the state, which does not allow sale of other producers' products.
And there's kind of on the creating any kind of odors, which I agree, it's kind of, I think it's a great smell. I mean, it's a natural smell. There's no excessive noise associated with the brewing process, and that could create any excessive noise for neighbors or. Correct.
Not any other foreseen noises.
There's also a point, a comment made earlier in the application about additional outdoor space, and is there something more than what we see on the site plan that's being projected?
No, the outdoor space, which we have.
Okay,
Which is,
okay.
This patio, just expanding the seating.
Well, you know, that used to be the jail. You know that? That's where the drunk tank was. So you may, it was also the fire station it was also the fire station for a number of years. And before that, Liberty. So,
I missed those parts, but I noticed that I read some history on the building. It's been many things since it's.
yeah,
it's been-
firehouse for a long time when I was a kid. And then there was a drunk tank in there, so. I know. No, I was just shown where it was. I think it was a lesson for me to stay away from it. So, just kind of I think this is wonderful. It's, Toulouse was a great operation and, things happen and places close and I'm surprised it's not been utilized before now. And I think this is a great use of this property. I'm for it.
It's with the city.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any other questions for the applicant? And thank you.
Thank you.
At this time, we will open up for public comments regarding the application. Well, again, if you'd like to make comments, you'll please give us your name and then limit your comments to 3 minutes. Is there anyone in the room that would like to have any comments regarding the application? Seeing none. Anyone on Zoom that would like to make public comments regarding the applicant, or the application, I'm sorry. We do not see any hands online. I don't think you see any. And having no comments from the public, we will close the public comment portion. and ask for the commissioners to deliberate and share your thoughts.
I think I tipped my hand. I just, very supportive of efforts like this in downtown. I think it'll be a great addition to our business community as well as another place for visitors to visit. One question, have you run a brewery before? Or is this your first one?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, his business partner's on. Looks like he has his hand raised. Maybe
Oh.
perhaps there's something that if you're okay with him.
Absolutely,
Okay.
sure.
Brooks, that's
Brooks,
you.
if you'd like to go, just unmute yourself, please.
Great. Thank you so much. I apologize for not being with you all this evening. I'm stuck over in Grand Rapids, but have made the trip quite a few times this summer as we're putting the project together. And thanks, Wes, for giving that great overview of the project. And the question, have we what's our background or brewery experience? So my personal experience is at Brewery Vivant here in Grand Rapids. I was the finance and operations manager for 8 years, sort of from 2010 to 2018, which, if everyone can remember, back then, that was kind of the big boom time of craft beer, when there was a new brewery opening. It seemed like every other day. And, my experience there, Brewery Vivant did distribute throughout the state, and was a larger operation than most smaller breweries, but we had really at our core was our restaurant, and that experience that we provided not only to tourists, that came in through the beer tourism industry, but also just for our core neighborhood. And I think a lot of what I learned at Brewery Vivant, about being good stewards of the community, good stewards of the environment, and then also providing just phenomenal product through both beverage and food, and atmosphere, is something that Wes and I are committed to carrying forward in the project that you guys are taking a look at tonight. So we're super excited to be, a part of Saugatuck. And, Wes, I think you spoke to your experience, but maybe he didn't say that he's been working on beer recipes, throughout the pandemic, as we were trying to get going prior to that, but the pandemic obviously put a pause on a lot of things, and Wes was working away at his recipes and quietly submitting his beer to the competitions around the country, and nonchalantly saying things like, "Oh yeah, I submitted, and yeah, they liked it. I got another gold medal and stuff." So rest assured, his beer is top notch, and we're excited to bring it to everyone in Saugatuck. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Twist.
you.
Just a comment. Thank you, Mr. Twist. So if this is anything like Brewery Vivant, I think this will be an excellent addition to the city of Saugatuck. And please say hi to Jason the next time you talk with him. I've known Jason and Brent since they opened New Holland 25, 30 years ago. Used to drink at their original bar. So Jason, if you've learned anything from Jason, I think this is going to be an excellent operation. So.
Yeah, I'll be sure to pass along. I saw him tonight, and we will offer more than popcorn at our establishment.
Don Russ Gardner says hello.
No, I just don't see anywhere. Are you planning to serve food?
There's a kitchen on the site plan.
I'm sorry, if you could just, just because we're recording too, yeah, so.
Yes, we are having to, planning to have a full restaurant as well.
Okay, thank you.
Very good. I too think it's, as I said earlier, I just think it's an excellent addition to that corner. Fits very well with everything else that's on Culver. So appreciate it. Is there any other deliberation, or if not?
I do have a question which is probably for Ryan. Just really a process question. So the special land use, as I understand it, is because it's a brewery, so it would be for a brewery. There's presumably already special land use approval that runs with the
Restaurant.
property for a restaurant. And this would add a brewery to that, so that this or a future owner could have a brewery there. Is that correct?
So we notice this as both. I mean, I think you're approving the mix of uses
The
just as
brewery,
much.
Distillery, winery.
Yeah, and restaurant. I mean, you're correct that it was a restaurant prior, but there's some provision of the zoning ordinance that talks about if it's a special land use that already exists, if you're kind of expanding it in some way or changing it in some way, that
Okay.
it's required to come back for the same process that it went through prior. So we included restaurant
I
with the
see.
brewery, distillery, winery, so that way everything's, covered, that mix is covered.
And it runs with the property.
And then it would
not
run with
just
the
the
land.
restaurant. Yeah.
Correct.
And just one other question, this is more for my education. So because we opened a public hearing, you did notify the nearby property owners?
Yep, everybody within 300 feet, put notice in the paper as well,
And the sandwich board is out.
and the board.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah.
Very good. We have a motion. We made?
Yeah, I'll make a motion to approve the special land use application for Culver Street Brewery.
Second. Did we close the public hearing? Did we close
Well, we
it?
actually have the commission's action during the public hearing. So it happens during the public hearing.
I thought you, yeah, if I recall, you closed.
We closed it.
Right.
Yeah, you closed it.
Yeah.
Yep. He
And-
closed it, she made a motion.
So we have a motion, we have a second, and I would ask the clerk to call the voice of the roll. The vote.
Yes.
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 Yes. Congratulations, guys. Thanks for the application. Thanks for trusting
Look forward to it. Thank you.
the town. Absolutely.
How long?
How soon do you think it will be finished and will it open like next spring, or you thinking this fall, or?
I think that was the original aspiration, and as things, I'm learning that everything takes a little longer, or quite a bit longer than you hope or than you think. We're looking at probably midsummer at this
Summer
time.
24.
Mhm.
Very good.
The other question people ask is, do you have a name yet?
We don't have a name, but very soon.
Fair enough.
Oh, it's not Culver Street Brewery.
I've been telling, I've been telling everybody that's the name of it.
Really, very soon though.
Okay.
We all want to get a sample before you
That's
open.
right.
You'll all be invited.
No, no, thank you. Gotta be careful here. Thank you very much.
Appreciate being here. Thank you.
Exciting, right? A nice addition.
We lost all of our audience.
Well, now it's down to just us. We move on to the third item under new business, the waterfront development zoning ordinance review. I think, Ryan, do you want to kick off? You want to have David do it, or?
Sure, Mr. Chair, and I'll note it's, it's just us maybe left in the room with Mr. Whitty, but there's still some guests online with us.
Correct,
but,
exactly.
Yeah, I think I'll turn it right over to Mr. Drossik. He's been busy going over your survey results and your pop-up engagement results. So there's a report on that. And then kind of the next step is really his recommendations. And then we'll discuss where we go from here.
Great. David?
Good evening. I wanted to check real quick. RC, are you able to allow me to share my screen?
Yeah, why don't we make you a co-host? And then you should be good to go. All right, you should be a co-host now, Dave. Is it letting you, Dave? There you go.
Okay, are you able to see that okay?
Yep.
Okay, good evening, everyone. As you know, this is the second of two reports giving an overall assessment of our project area. And this also provides a overview of the public inputs process and the initial recommendations for the zoning ordinance amendments. So really the objective for this evening, would like to get a general consensus on the direction of the changes, just to get your initial buy-in and get any last suggestions before we start putting pen to paper. So with that, I want to just touch on the surveys first. As I had mentioned last time, we had a pretty good response rate for the waterfront survey. We had 310 participants by the time we closed out the survey. 76% were either full-time or part-time residents. And just onto a couple of the questions, the favorite activities of most of the respondents were dining, events, and walking and biking in the project area. And the most important aspects of the waterfront were access, pathways, views, and open space. And the folks who responded, they really wanted us to focus on incentives to provide public open space and access, and to control the scale, height, and width of buildings. So I don't think that's any surprise. I think this really just confirms some of the assumptions going into the project. Concerning the building height in the building in general, the survey results for both sides of the river were no more than 2.5 stories maximum. So that's our current requirement. Parking in the front yard in front of buildings, especially on Water Street, was seen as something that was less attractive. So if we have some suggestions concerning parking location later in the report. And I was a little bit surprised by this, but there was less interest in the architectural features and building materials. So going into the project, I thought we would have some lighter level of architectural requirements, understanding the HDC also reviews anything in this area on the east side of the river, downtown area. But there was really not much interest based on the survey results. So I was a little bit surprised by that. But we'll address that a little bit later as well. So then we had the visual preference survey, and a few participants less. We had 293, and about 75% were full-time or part-time residents. And as you remember from the survey, we had 25 different building types. I tried to get a good variety of different sizes, scales, modern versus traditional, historic. Some had open space or landscaping, and we wanted to try to see if we could get a general sense of trends of what people appreciated and what they thought was desirable for both sides of the river in our study area. And the common elements of the preferred buildings, which we had only 7 of those buildings were preferred for Park Street, and 8 of them were preferred for Water Street. And the full results are shown at the end of your report. But the common elements that were preferred were really buildings that were 1 to 2 stories. Most of them, of these 7 or 8, they all had horizontal clapboard siding. I think all of them had pitched roofs, and they're really just more of a traditional style. Whereas the buildings that they did not prefer, the majority, were a little bit taller. They're 2 to 5 stories. There's really a wide range of building materials in those 17 or 18 buildings that were not preferred. So it was really not a trend on that way. There were some, wood siding versus other modern siding. There really wasn't a trend that way. Flat roof buildings were really not seen as that desirable. And again, some were modern and some were more traditional. But I think the main elements were the control of the stories and buildings that were of a smaller scale that would be more appropriate along our waterfront areas. So any questions on the surveys before we move forward?
The only comment I would make is that, like you said, I'm not surprised at all by this. And I think that the fact that, and I know you said you were slightly surprised that there wasn't more comments about architectural style. I think the fact of the matter is the buildings that have been built along the waterfront were not built with any kind of design, and people built what they built. As a matter of fact, the old Mermaid, that was a boat shed. So if you start to think about where these got built and why they got built, they were not subject to any kind of design process other than their individual needs for their property. So I'm not surprised that people didn't key in on that, because we see a lot of eclectic buildings on the waterfront.
And David, the one thing that I did notice from doing, I think I had 3 opportunities where I was doing engagement with the public on the boards. The photos that we used on the boards, but also on the survey, where we did show some of the more modern buildings, some of the more, you know, 2.5 story type of buildings. I had a lot of people say that they thought they were very attractive, but the photos made it look like they had 100% lot coverage, almost like they'd be on a main street. And the people looked at it and they said, no, too big. Meaning that it was, you know, because like a couple of them showed a corner. And so there was buildings on each side, or it went all the way out to the sidewalk. And, you know, so in interpreting it, I kind of, you know, realized that they're more open to, you know, some modern design, as long as it still gave them access to be able to see the water and have access to it. So, you know, that's one thing that we didn't really have photos in there of anything modern that showed walkways with water behind it. You know, but that's just my only comment, you know, that I had regarding that.
Yeah, and I think the visual preference survey really, I think, was a supplement to the main waterfront assessment survey. So I think it was helpful. The visual preference surveys are always a little bit difficult because, you know, people are looking at certain elements and maybe not you know, certain ones and not others. And there may be things that they appreciate about a building that they don't like. I was hoping to find a little bit more on that aspect. There was a follow-up question for each building that said, you know, are there any elements of this building that you prefer? And I thought I would get a little bit more, you know, in terms of positive results on certain aspects of buildings, but I really just didn't get anything that was over 50%. So I think it was over 50% of folks that were appreciating a different aspect that would have been, you know, more noteworthy. But I think there wasn't really much else that I could get from the other elements that they were appreciating about buildings that they didn't like. Okay, this report then also moves into a number of initial recommendations for zoning ordinance text amendments, as well as how we would implement these through zoning district regulation, whether it's through a traditional zoning district regulation, overlays, or planned unit development. So concerning the general requirements recommendations, so first architecture. So as I mentioned before, we really didn't have any conclusive preferences. And in my opinion, I think the architecture needs to just remain the primary purview of the HDC. So, you know, I think I did have a conversation with RC and the HDC a few weeks ago. And I did explain that some form-based codes do have architectural guidelines or requirements concerning frontages and the amount of windows and doors, transparency, different entry type features. So zoning practice does at times include very detailed architectural requirements, but based on the survey results, as well as the really the strong and involved HDC in this community, I think that we can leave it in the hands of the HDC for at least the area on the east side of the river within the historic district. So I won't have any specific recommendations on architecture. It'll mainly be dimensional requirements and land use. So then moving into downtown parking, I recommend that the downtown waiver is retained. Where parking is on site, I think we do need measures to reduce the visual impact of on-site parking. I think there should be a front setback and front yard restriction for on-site. So parking to the side of a building or behind a building where there is space, I think that is just a better aesthetic, at least from the street view. And then concerning overhead doors and front-loaded buildings, I would recommend that those are restricted so that we don't have that, you know, facing the street. Provides a better character and aesthetic along the street. Concerning lot sizes, if you remember from the report last month, I included all of the lot sizes for all the subject parcels. And so with that, most of them were far beyond what our minimum lot sizes for C1 WSN and C2 WSS. So I believe those current minimums are between 4,500 and 6,500 square feet for minimum lot size. I would actually recommend that we go up a bit further, up to closer to 8,000 square feet or even 10,000 square feet for those two districts respectively. I think that would give a little bit extra room for open space, access and visibility. So I think the larger lot sizes, it would make maybe only a few parcels non-conforming, but that would have no bearing except for it may decrease the building envelope if we have smaller lots with setbacks that are deeper. That might have some impact. So we can assess that at some point. But I think for the most part, lots are a bit larger than what we require as a minimum. Then moving on to setbacks, I feel like we might want to eliminate the 0 front setback for C1 and C2. In the rest of the downtown area, we have more of the Main Street type character, but I think there's a clear distinction between the waterfront lots and the areas that are really that more Main Street area, where there really should be 0 setback, and buildings should be drawn very close to the public right of way, the sidewalk, to really be a more walkable area where you can do window shopping. It's just a different character in that area. So here I would actually recommend that we might add on a reasonable minimum front setback for both. I think in the Water Street North we could go maybe to 5 feet, and then Water Street South maybe 10 to 15 feet because those are larger, deeper parcels. But then at the same time, I think we should continue to draw buildings closer to the road, but just not right up on the front property line. So I think we might want to consider both a minimum and maximum setback for the front, so that we're drawing buildings closer to the road, but leaving some wiggle room so that the front building line needs to be within an area that's between the minimum and maximum setback. So, for instance, we could have like a 5 foot, or let's just say for WSS, you have a 10-foot minimum, but then maybe we put a 20 or 25 foot maximum. So that building's generally drawn closer to the road, but not on it like in a Main Street type character. Then for side setbacks, for C1 WSN, I think we should eliminate the 0 foot setback. Obviously, we see in that area that we could have buildings that take up the entire frontage without a setback, and it wouldn't allow for views into the water or even access. So I would suggest maybe a 10-foot setback, or on each side, or even just a 20-foot on one side, just to reduce the overall scale of the building, allow for the views of the river. And then we could even have waivers to that as incentives through the PUD process. So, for instance, if a developer did provide that public area, that could be a waiver that could be granted. Maybe it's a lesser setback if they were able to reserve that area for public access. Same with the rear. I think the 25-foot rear setback makes sense. I wouldn't change that unless it was through a waiver process through PUD. So I think that could be one way we could incentivize public space along the waterfront. But at the same time, I think we would still need to have a minimum rear setback. Maybe it would be 15 feet or so, but that would allow for some extra square footage for new buildings, redevelopment, but give some incentive to allow for public access. Building width and roof lines. So building width, really the width as it compares to the building width versus the lot width, it's not currently regulated. So I would suggest maybe we do a 60% building width as it compares to lot width for C2 Water Street South. But I don't think this would be necessary or appropriate for C1 Water Street North, because we would potentially add in side setbacks, and those lots are much narrower and smaller. So I think the 60% just might be a bit much. I think we can accomplish the same thing on a smaller scale for those smaller lots with side setbacks. And variation roof lines, we could look at that. It is an architectural aspect that maybe we want to leave in the hands of the HDC. But in some cases, waterfront communities do require some variation in roof lines so that it's not just to control the bulk and the scale of that upper floor roof area. Concerning height, based on the survey results, I think we certainly stay to our 28-foot maximum, which is the midpoint of a roof, and 2.5 stories max, which is our current. So I think we maintain that current restriction. We may want to define what a half story is, though. The zoning ordinance currently does not define half story, and I think a half story, it can be limited by the livable space by definition. I think you see some buildings, even in the city, where the kind of the tilted up dormers can provide a lot of extra, almost like cheat third floor space. If you have a significantly wide dormer, you can almost create a third story and really have that effect. And I think that's really not what we want to encourage, but to limit the livable space within a half story. So that's something I think we could address. Concerning maximum building coverage and minimum open space, for C2, Water Street South, and R4 Resort, we have requirements of 45 to 50% building coverage, respectively. I think we maintain that. I have no issues with that. I think that's a pretty good amount of open space that would be preserved from in just non-building space with that requirement. In C1, Water Street North, right now there's no limit. So you can really the only thing that would affect your overall lot coverage is your rear waterfront setback, because there's no front setback requirement, no side setback requirements. But I think we could decrease this to maybe 70 or 80%, and I think it would still be reasonable for development's sake and for meeting the goals of this project. And then we also may want to look at just the minimum usable open space. So, require that type of civic space for both, customers, residents, visitors. So maybe there's a certain amount of civic space that could even be, adjacent sidewalk dining, could be dining in the back, could even be rooftop space as well. Concerning land use, we chatted about this a little bit last time. There were several comments and ideas about the land use regulation for our districts. I think for the C1 and C2 districts, the single and two family residential really didn't make sense based on reviewing the character of the area and what may be appropriate. I think we could modernize and simplify some of the land use terms and then clearly define them, because some of them are not defined. So we had a misunderstanding of what certain land uses were, because I had no context and they weren't defined. So last time there was comments that helped clarify what some of those terms meant. And also, we may want to increase the reliance on the special land use process. So there are several uses that I noted in the report that were just allowable by right. We may want to require increase the number of special land uses in this area. So that's something that we could consider as well. Then on to the actual how we apply these requirements. And there are a couple different ideas here. And as I mentioned in the report, we just want to make sure that it is the most simplistic way to do it. And I think there's a couple different options for traditional base districts or an overlay. The first one would be to divide out 3 additional waterfront zoning districts. And I think this would be a little bit excessive. I don't think you want 3 new zoning districts on the map, but it would be a way to make it be very simple. Say these are the requirements for Water Street North on the west side of Water Street. So we could define that area and call it just designate it as its own district. But I think it would be very clear on the applicability requirements if we had separate sections for each new district. But I think adding new districts on the map, I think that just might be a little excessive. The next would be to create a waterfront district that would include the entire area. And then we could have various applicability based on how we would define certain sub areas within that waterfront zoning district. So the example I gave was, north versus south of Francis Street. There might be, the C1 versus C2 recommendations for that zoning district, based on a physical boundary that we reference in the zoning ordinance in that district. Third would be waterfront overlay district, that could have a really kind of a similar intent. And then lastly would be to amend C1, C2, and C4 with separate, distinct waterfront lot requirements. So essentially, we'd have a section that said C1, and we have C1 on both sides of Water Street, and we would have a table for the requirements for the non-waterfront lots, and then separate for waterfront lots. As I was thinking about this a bit more too, I almost wonder if it might make sense to do a combination of that third and fourth option, where we can establish the waterfront overlay district on the map. We draw it on the map, and it applies to all three zoning districts. And within that overlay description, we define it, and then we give our strong intent statements, the overlay district goals, and the justification. And then within C1, C2, and C4, within each of those sections, we could do something similar to what I mentioned before, whereas we can say, here are the requirements for C1, just without the overlay, and then we'd have C1 districts within the overlay, C1 district requirements that are within the overlay. So we'd still have those two different sets of rules for each district, but we'd have the overlay district that would be the defining area rather than having to describe, north versus south of Francis or some other described boundary in that manner. So as I was thinking, I might almost recommend options 3 and 4 as together. And then lastly, Chris Patterson mentioned last time the opportunity to look at the PUD provision as well. And Ryan, Chris, and I had a really good conversation about the PUD as a tool. And really, there would be two different options. First would be a voluntary PUD, which obviously you have that now. But we could have a waterfront PUD option that has very distinct goals and design characteristics that we define for a waterfront PUD within this area. And we'd really want to state clearly what we are considering recognizable waterfront benefits through a waterfront voluntary PUD. And as mentioned before, this might be the way to where we consider the waiver requests if they are providing the open space and the visibility and the public access. And then really the more aggressive approach that we discussed, and we're a little bit concerned about this. This may not be, it's going to be a little bit more complicated, and we'd have to apply this site by site, and it might be a little bit more cumbersome to a smaller lot owner who just wants to do a simple project. But we could define the entire area designated as a PUD. On the map, all of this area would just be defined PUD. And then with that, we'd have a PUD approach to each individual parcel, so that anyone developing a parcel would have to come in for a preliminary plan for the use and the design, and then later for a final PUD site plan. So obviously, I think this would be you would have the most discretionary authority here. You'd have the most control, but it may be, some may consider this a bit of an overreach. So we were a little bit concerned about that, but it would certainly be the highest level of control you would have over this area. So again, I would first, I guess my recommendation, I would be most comfortable with options 3 and 4 for the use of an overlay and updates to the three zoning districts, and then having defining the voluntary PUD with waterfront specific goals and objectives that would have to, so that we could really define what those benefits to the community would be. So obviously a lot for you to consider this evening. I think our next steps, as I mentioned before, I'd like to get the general consensus on how we move forward with the project. We can certainly adjust those dimensional requirements up or down. I think if you're comfortable with the general outline of what we want to include, we can create that zoning framework now, put in numbers as placeholders. We can even leave blanks in certain cases, but we can develop the framework, and then we can really calibrate those dimensional requirements up or down at a future meeting. But I think if we can at least agree upon the general framework and the use of traditional zoning districts, overlays, and PUD, I think that would be the best guidance for us tonight.
Thanks, David. A question, when you talked about the traditional base districts or the overlays, in one of you said, like, we were talking about having the entire waterfront district being, making that one zone. Can you have multiple overlays within that? So like if we made the entire waterfront all one zone, then we could have overlays put in for like west side of the street, east side of the street, north of this street, south of that street. You could divide it up.
Dividing up no, in terms of the overlay district, and then concerning the overlay district or the PUD, just want to make sure I understand.
I guess it's like, if we looked at it, we said, okay, we're gonna combine and have waterfront north and south as one zone.
Yes.
Then could you have different either PUDs or overlays within that zone that would then describe what can be built on west side of the street versus east side of the street, what can be built north of, say, whatever street we decided? Or if you had it all as one zone, what's the plus and negative of that, I guess?
Well, if we combined Water Street North and Water Street South as one zone, what I would suggest that we just combine them in the area of our project area, so that we'd leave Water Street North and South non-waterfront as those districts, but then we'd create, maybe it's just a downtown waterfront district. And so it's a completely different defined new zoning district. And then we could make the distinction between north and south. We can just do it by defining the boundary between the two. Maybe it's by a street, maybe it's some other way. But I think if we create a new district, we could still regulate north-south distinctly within the same zoning district. So that would be an option.
Scroll up one page. It's your number 2, I think, is what I hear you saying, Steve.
Correct. The number 2, which was creating one district, but then you said you would be more in favor of 3 and 4.
I think this would 3 and 4 would allow us to keep the current number of districts. So we wouldn't be adding an extra, an additional waterfront zoning district. I think with all of these, we're really just trying to do the same thing, defining an area and then applying requirements distinctly to those, sub areas in a way. It's really, I think, preference at this point. I think we could accomplish the same thing with all of these. I think the best thing to do is just to make sure that we're taking a simple approach the best we can. With 3 and 4, we could keep those districts as they are, but we'd have the secondary requirements within each one. Or we could do one waterfront district and then make those sub area distinct areas, by describing them.
Absolutely.
And I apologize to my fellow commissioners if I just totally missed it. But I'm thinking, what are we trying to solve for? In terms of an overlay district, combining the districts, keeping them separate. I mean, are we trying to solve for what?
Great question.
Well,
and it's probably because I'm tired.
yeah, I know we all are. My feeling, Ryan can speak and then David can speak. We were looking at a couple of meetings ago, we talked about what is the redevelopment potential of different properties.
Right.
And based on what our current zoning laws are, what could be built on it? And are we comfortable with our current zoning the way it stands? Because we don't have a lot of this kind of type of overlay where we would have the ability to kind of dictate. And plus, we have like Water Street North can have 100% lot coverage, no setbacks. Are we comfortable with that? What if it's those two parcels? Right, correct. And so it really was like when those two parcels were available, if somebody had bought it and had they gotten the variances, they could have built on the entire parcel, you know. So when we started looking at the waterfront and trying to protect it and making certain that our zoning matches with what the community would like to see. And that's really what we're trying to look at here is, you know, should we have different lot coverages? Should you have setbacks? Should you have water access? Should you require sidewalks? Things that is not currently in the zone right now. That's how I understood when we were originally talking about having the moratorium and then reviewing it. David, did you have anything? Or Ryan?
No, I think you.
So I just
I
think.
could not hear the question very well, but I heard your answer, but I couldn't hear the question very well. I'm sorry.
So the question was, what was the original purpose of looking at all these options and why, you know, why were what we were trying to accomplish?
It was my question, David, and I don't know can you hear me now?
Yes, yes, ma'am.
And I said, it's probably because I'm tired. But, in going through all of this, it's helpful to me if somebody can continue to remind me what we're trying to solve for. And I know it's generally protection of the waterfront, and protecting it from development. I know that, but, fundamentally, it's just a lot to absorb in terms of the various options. And it would just be helpful if, as we're talking about these various, options, reminding us every once in a while how that works relative to what we're trying to do. I'm sorry.
I agree.
No,
Because it's a lot to take in on
It is.
this.
I'm wondering if maybe it's Ryan or even you, Steve, could we maybe have a tour? I mean, could we walk together and look at this so that we can, it's hard for me to read this and then picture what we're looking at. I know that's maybe a little unconventional, but a little field trip just so we can picture what we're.
I love that idea, especially because I feel like we end up, this is my bias because I'm on the other side of the river. I feel like we end up really steering towards this side of the river. There's a lot of the development, so we could include both. I think that would be great too.
And I appreciate Commissioner Gaunt's question. Maybe what's needed here is more of what are the pros and cons of each one of the choices, right? Okay, what are you gonna get by going with this route and what will you lose? Because each one of these has trade-offs, right? There's
Exactly.
risk and rewards. And I think I understand where this is going, but I would appreciate something I think. some of
And
us can
eventually,
ask.
I mean, we're going to have to be able to articulate whatever
Right.
it is we decide to do.
Right.
We won't have David by our side to do that articulation. So it's really important that at least I can do that.
I agree. All the talk of the different zoning and the overlays, it's got to be simple for the end user to read.
Right.
So that it's not having to find which appendix index do I have to go to. But I do want to comment on the some of the things he suggested. I really like the minimum max on the frontage. I thought that was a good solution to making sure they stay close, but not right on the sidewalks. I like the waiver idea for the setbacks, because that we can start to really incentivize them building the boardwalk in places that it's not, so that could go there. I thought the Water Street South could raise that number a little bit, because it's pretty low currently in some of those spots. Either way. And then because we have the setbacks, the side setbacks on Water Street North, would that one need to be reduced by 100? Because you're already reducing it because you're given a side setback or a public area. So those are my 4 little comments to the other suggestions. And then just how do we make it simple for the end user on the district versus overlays versus PUDs? Because we got a little glazed over there.
Yeah. David, from a simplistic standpoint, I know we don't want to create additional zones. But is that easier to explain to people than what overlays are and PUDs?
I suppose it would be, I think it might be the easiest if we just show it separately on the map as 3 new waterfront zoning districts. I think, yes, it may be user friendly that way. I think the concern is just adding additional zoning districts to the map, and the city already has a lot of zoning districts for its size. And, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. But I mean, that would be a way to make it very user friendly. I mean, all someone would have to do is look at their property on the map and they know exactly what section to turn to. And, we each individual chapter would have the intent statement and, everything that we're looking to accomplish as part, to really, introduce the requirements for each district. So, I mean, again, I don't think that's a bad option either. It just, my initial thought was just to not add additional districts, but maybe it is the most simplistic way just for the user to just turn to their page for the applicable district. That could be one way to do it.
We're adding additional zoning districts.
No, I had asked about the first one. Would that be the simplest? Because all you would be doing is just creating 3 waterfront districts.
Right.
You'd have waterfront north, waterfront south, and then waterfront resort.
Right.
So like that would that be the easiest as opposed to trying to explain PUDs or overlays? That was my question to it.
Yeah, I would, I guess, Mr. Chair, my thought is, I think Dave's suggestion on 4 to amend the existing districts and put maybe, a separate section for waterfront lots. I still think there's ease of use there because you're looking at where, okay, this is the district. I know I have a waterfront lot. These are my requirements. I mean, I still think there's still some, instead of maybe completely new
Agreed.
districts, I still think we accomplish the ease with maybe just separate section within that particular district. I think I do agree with Dave's, assessment on that piece.
And I like that. That's what I was trying to figure out, like, can you have just one kind of overlay that divides a district between waterfront and non-waterfront, or can you have multiple overlays within a one zone? I don't think we would need it more than one, but
Yeah, I think we just define, okay, I mean, we've been talking about waterfront, lots of waterfront frontage, so I mean, I don't know, Dave, I mean, maybe I didn't completely catch maybe the combination approach, and why we would need to overlay plus a separate waterfront lot requirements, why we couldn't just say
Yeah.
waterfront lot required specific to that district and what we're looking for.
I guess, I mean, it'd be really the same thing. One, we would actually be able to show it on the zoning map so that, someone could look at the zoning map and they would see that, okay, I'm in Water Street, north, but I see that I'm within an overlay. And then, they'd actually be able to visually see that boundary versus, just describing it, within that section. The distinction between waterfront and non-waterfront. So, I mean, I think we're looking to accomplish the exact same thing with those. We're just either showing it on the map or showing it through the description of that area, basically by saying waterfront lots.
So help me understand. So the first bullet point, isn't it essentially what we have today? We have 3 distinct districts, right?
well, that would require, our districts right now have both east and west. So like Water Street North, the waterfront is the west side.
Okay.
The east, so like, would we want to have different zoning between what's on the waterfront versus what's on? So that it became, you can do an overlay, a waterfront overlay within the north, like using the north as an example, or you could just separate that zone
Got it.
and
Okay.
have Water Street North being basically the east side of it, and then Water Street
North,
or
west,
waterfront or whatever
right.
it's called,
Yeah.
waterfront property.
Okay, understood. So kind of my thought on this is that we want something that's simple and easily understood by not only the planning commissioners, city staff, but also the public and people that are choosing to develop property, right? But also we want to have a toolkit here that allows us to be able to take this where the public is telling us they want this to go, right? There's also the survey, which is great. There's a lot of good information there. So that's kind of how I look at it, is that, and that's where I really would lean back on the experts to say, planning consultant and zoning administrator, what are the appropriate tools we need within these districts, whether it's an overlay or whatever it may be, to allow us and future planning commissions to keep the spirit of this where we want to go with it. 2 is, waterfront access. And I really, now that I've really started kind of spend time with this, the north and south districts are different in one key aspect. The south district, you have public boardwalk access from Coughlin Park all the way up to Main Street, or Mary. stops there, Ship and Shore, and then you've got so on and so forth. It's always been a discussion in this community about going south around Kalamazoo Lake to have public access, which is a huge project, or in this case, north too, to go take it all the way up to Willow Park. Now, that's a long-term aspiration, but I think within the zoning code itself, I think we should come up with some way to continue to encourage the development of that waterfront access. I don't know if we'll ever, obviously have to go around the chain ferry and all that, but that would be great to have that extension all the way up to Willow Park.
Would that be accomplished, David, through a PUD?
Does that make sense what I'm saying?
I heard it in his waiver, because the current setback is 25, but you know what, we'll give you some leeway if you protect and provide this boardwalk through your section. That's how I heard that.
Right,
explanation.
which I thought the waiver came
that's a
within,
great idea.
within a plan unit development.
Especially on that north side where there's not a lot to deal with, so they're gonna be looking for that.
Now, in that situation, David, would we have more control underneath the mandatory versus the voluntary?
Yes, I think, well, yeah, I think with the mandatory, you're gonna have more control, no matter what. It's just, I think there could be some criticism concerning overreach in requiring the water access and boardwalk rather than incentivizing it. And that may be, that might be a little bit of a political issue as well. But it could be something to where it could be landowner concerns as well. But I think in general, I think if we incentivizing something is going to be probably better accepted than requiring it. And we could see pushback or even challenge if we're saying it has to be done. But I mean, I think we could chat about that a little bit more with the city attorney as well.
I like the incentivize as opposed to make it mandatory. Yeah, absolutely. That's a long-term plan on that for sure, but I think I've heard it so long and so often here that now's a chance to try to build that in where we can and incentivize it.
And just to go back about the overlay, the number 3 and number 4 options together, if we were able to map the overlay and then define it and give the intent statements in the zoning ordinance text, I think that would really help us to justify these new regulations. If we had one section to say, there was a study, there was a full process, here are our priorities, summarize what we heard from the community, but we'd really be able to justify these changes by writing out those intent statements and purpose statements for an overlay district in one section, and then having overlay reference within the 3 districts, so that we don't have to replicate those waterfront goals and purpose statements in a subsection for each of the 3 districts. So I think from just consolidating the justification for these changes, I think the overlay would help us just to do that rather than having to repeat within 3 individual chapters. So that might just be a way to be able to see it and then summarize those statements in one section rather than all 3.
Maybe it's just me, but I thought one of the purposes was to work towards reducing the number of zoning districts in our community overall, and starting with this. And I wonder if the character of Water Street North is so different from the character of Water Street South, for example, that we need to keep those as 2 districts. And I do see on the west side of the river, perhaps that is a different character, variety of ways, but it just, and then to say, okay, well, on one side of Water Street versus the other side of Water Street, and it seems that we seem to be going, maybe I'm missing it backwards somewhat in terms of adding layers and districts and to what, in my mind, we should be simplifying the process. In other words, separately, all the ideas of setbacks and whatever else is fine with me. I versus voluntary PUD and mandatory. I'm not even sure I've ever heard of a voluntary PUD. I'm not sure how it would work. You say incentives, I don't know if you mean financial or what. But if the mandatory setback under a mandatory PUD, it would constitute a taking of property, illegal taking of property. I would hate to have more lawsuits, so it's kind of a scattershot, but those are some of my thoughts.
I can just touch on the PUD. I mean, interesting when you look at your actual zoning map, a lot of the properties, not just in these particular zoning districts around the water, have, cross lines on them. That's because they were PUD developments. And so they were through a voluntary PUD process where somebody came in, and we do have a portion of our ordinance that allows somebody to apply for a PUD overlay, to do something a little bit different than what because they needed some sort of flexibility for whatever reason. And so I think what we're saying here is, okay, if somebody wants to do just a traditional project, here's your regulations, you build it to the zoning ordinance requirements. If your project's gonna be, limited, or you have some concerns with doing the project that you want to do with the zoning that's in place, and you're asking for a little bit of flexibility, that PUD process then can allow us to also have some, maybe maybe there's some incentive there for somebody to say, hey, I'm willing to give you public waterfront access, but I need maybe a little bit more setbacks or lot coverage or something along those lines. So there's some give and take in that PUD overlay process.
Okay. I think, I think about the one correspondence that we didn't get in the 11th hour, that was included in our packet, and they talk about communities. We have one shot, we have a real opportunity with that. And, Commissioner Gardner's comment, my gosh, this community would jump up and down with joy if we were able to increase the boardwalk.
Absolutely.
And then I love the side yard setbacks, so that people, when they do walk, even if they're walking down Water Street, they're able to see the water through the buildings. Height restrictions, absolutely. So those kind of, to your question, and I'm sure, you have all those are kind of the underlying goals, how we, that we work towards. If we could increase the boardwalk, how do we do that? And incentivize or mandatory?
Yeah, I completely agree. And I just had one question along those lines, which is, and I think, David, this is a question for you. It seemed like the visual preference study showed a real preference for a traditional look. And I was just wondering how you see that fitting in with some of the recommended changes.
Well, yes, and I think in terms of traditional, maybe it's both the architecture as well as the building placement. So some of the traditional sites were you could see the setbacks and separation. They just looked less dense and intense than some of the other options. So some were kind of traditional site placement, and then the other sense is the traditional architecture. And so that's a tough one though, because we didn't get a real consensus on what they wanted to see in terms of from the overall survey, in terms of things they wanted to regulate or what was a priority. But the visual preference survey leaned that direction. I still think that the HDC is going to have a pretty good handle on everything on the east side and in the downtown area, and they've always they're open to more modern in a way, as long as it's complementing the area in general. So I almost feel that we should defer to the HCC based on how they've considered both traditional and modern architecture as it relates to the existing context.
Okay, well then just a thought I will add is maybe then we think about the other side of the river that's not part of the HDC. There are some structures over there that are would fall into the unfavorable category, in my opinion. If ever redeveloped, it would be nice to perhaps have them fall into the more preferable traditional look.
David, not to throw something else into the mix, but since we have you have Water Street North and Water Street South, and we wanted to try to like identify the requirements if you're on the waterfront side of it, is it possible that the east side could be just made to be added to their neighboring zones? So like the zone that's directly east of the east side of Water Street, which I don't have my zone map in front of me, but could you just annex and have that zone cover everything up to up to the road, Water Street, and then you have Water Street North only be in the waterfront?
Water Street East.
Right, there isn't a Water Street East zoning district right now.
Right, I'm just
sure
saying,
they-
so
Yeah,
I thought you're saying, helping you out.
I'm just saying,
Yeah.
instead of like, when we were originally talking about adding three, I was like, well, why wouldn't could you just create the east side of the street and attach it to the neighboring zone that's already in existence? Could we look at that? Because even like on some of that, maybe it's considered more of like a Main Street type of an appeal, but parts of the east side of Water Street already has kind of that, or if it did have it, would that be something people would oppose? I don't think so.
You can look at that. I think some of your Water Street East uses are gonna be, maybe not as desirable as you go further north potentially, but that's something that we can look at.
And
That would
then
be-
we would.
It would meet our goal of reducing the number
Right,
of zones.
then we wouldn't be creating any additional zones and we wouldn't actually have to create any overlays. We would just reduce down the size of those two zones to be in waterfront only.
And you're actually focusing then the commonality of use east and west.
Correct.
And again. So.
And again, I have to go back, I'm sure as you would, and kind of look at what are the rules on those
Yep.
neighboring zones. Like we did with the, homework assignment we had where you put out Water Street North, Water Street South and Resort, what was allowed, and we all gave comments as to whether or not we think that, should we kind of streamline that to either, now we could take a look at those neighboring, because truthfully, even on the resort side, there's times where I'll look at it and I'll say, well, the waterfront properties in C4, I think should be zoned differently than the west side of Park Street. Because west side of Park Street to me should be more of Peninsula West or Peninsula South.
Right.
Because it's, so I kind of see over there that it should just be a waterfront district. And then the other side of the street should be whatever the neighboring zone is. And I think that would actually simplify a lot of the things. We want to make it very easy for us to explain it to people. And plus, I think there's a lot of commonality between the east side on this side of the river of water and the west side of Park to their neighbors, to their west, and then down here to the neighbors to the east. So I would like to suggest that we take a look at that.
So to that point, could you then conceivably combine districts? Can it cross the body of water so you have the same?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of, yeah. And if you're the river, you're the river. You're the river.
Right, when I could go.
Riverfront, waterfront,
Right.
call it
Some
whatever.
have tried, but
I like this. Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that direction a lot.
Yep.
Since you were asking for our direction.
That's true.
I'm still stuck on the field trip that Holland next, I'm thinking, when are we gonna do? That's fantastic.
Do we like the idea of having them investigate? Having waterfront, each of the zones being the waterfront properties and then the other side of the street going into the adjoining?
Mhm.
I think it's worth investigating.
I'm in agreement. I would want to understand, and I don't know if anybody can even answer the question as to what the thought was, why that wasn't done originally. Maybe it just wasn't thoughtful enough, but was there some logic behind this? Doing east and west side of the park? Ryan?
I don't know the history. I'm guessing it
I-
had to do with the various dimensional requirements and the different types of uses and trying not to create non-conforming issues and.
But it's probably something that we could, if we're looking at those type of changes, we can amend even those zones to allow the uses that we believe would be appropriate for that side of the street if it's not currently in the zone. Also, I think if we ever wanted to tackle the next phase of trying to reduce down the number of zones, it would then make it easier to say, okay, let's reduce, instead of having 4 zones here in the commercial area, we reduce it down, because the waterfront's been taken out now. And then the other ones become easier for us to possibly condense, same way over on the peninsula. And maybe I don't need all the different zones. We just need waterfront and then, peninsula.
And even on this side, if there needs to be an overlay, it could be for the other side of Water Street. I mean, it seems like that would be the complicated part. It does seem like both sides of the river, the waterfront, arguably that could be the same.
Right.
And so then if the other side, which it seems like it's a little bit more commercial, then like on the peninsula side is easy. It seems like across Park Street,
Same as
it's,
Peninsula West, right?
um,
You want a direction and we've given you
I'm
some
thinking this
direction.
may make it actually easier than trying to do overlays, HUDs, and adding new zones.
Yeah, I think it's a great option to assess. Just we want to make sure that, when we absorb into another district, and just want to make sure that that's the appropriate district for, the environment that we're bringing into it. So I agree. I think it would be a nice, easy way to handle it, if it can work out that way. And then, yeah, maybe we even make some slight adjustments to those districts that have accepted the other parts of north and south. So, yeah, I think we can certainly do that assessment.
Because I think that because we've already kind of, like I said, we've done the assessment. Like once we get into rewriting, I don't know, as part of your summary, but I remember where you did lay out, what was a special land use, what was permitted, what wasn't permitted, and we all kind of went through and said, should it be consistent across the zone? So if we're going to be making those changes, this is our opportunity to make them consistent or leave them as separate. But also if we needed to add certain uses in because of adjoining, parcels, we can also add those into those adjoining, whatever the zones are that they're being adjoined to.
And is the historic district kind of like an overlay? Does it have to be contiguous with a zone, or is it its own separate thing?
I'm not understanding.
Oh, I'm just curious. I was just curious because one thing I was thinking about, and I don't know if it's good or bad, but if we had one zone that crossed the river, only part of it would obviously be in the historic district because the west side is not in the historic district. So I don't know if we'd want to expand the historic district or if that matters. I just didn't know if it sort of is what it is or if it's tied to zones in some way.
Right, yeah, so the historic district isn't tied to a specific zoning district. It does some interesting things through certain districts, especially up on Lucy Street. So, yeah, those boundaries aren't necessarily specific to your zones.
Okay.
And I think there's a process you have to go through in order to extend the historic district to another.
Yep.
How lengthy it is, but
It is lengthy. Actually, somebody just asked me about it the other day, so, yeah.
David, does that give you enough information to kind of prepare for our next meeting?
Yes, yes. And I think, I can work on the actual requirements and the language. I think we had general consensus on some of the dimensional requirements and others. I can begin, drafting up that language without knowing the overall zoning district framework yet. So I can do that while at the same time assessing the option to absorb into different districts. And so, yeah, I think we have plenty to do for our next meeting. And Ryan and I also discussed maybe the possibility of us meeting, having special meetings as well. So maybe we could think about that once we get more in front of you, just to ensure that we're moving quick enough to have the moratorium either extended, not as long as we would otherwise have.
Correct. Yeah, because the moratorium is in place. But no, I do think you can move forward. I think we have seems like a strong consensus here on the need for the setbacks that you were proposing, the lot coverage, ideas. And as you said, you can kind of put them in there, underline them. And then if we determined that, no, we wanted to have 70% versus 80, that would be very, very helpful. Anything else on this, or can we close out this section of new business?
I would just say that I'm very pleased by the work that's been done and getting out in the public. It's really been, I didn't hear any single person at the Expo when I was out there doing the board saying, well, who cares?
No.
No
They
one
all
said
did.
that.
They all thought it was great that we were taking time
Yeah.
to do it.
I heard a lot of great compliments and I just want to thank David and thank Brian and the city staff for keeping this on track. And I appreciate the flexibility and comments from my fellow commissioners. I think that I'm pleased.
Communications, we had, obviously we had the 2 letters that came in, was given to each of us today, and we had one communication from Denise Barswick. I butchered her name, but this was really related to these surveys. So there's no other communication, the report of the officers. I think Ryan has his zoning administrator activity report that was part of our kits. Was there any questions on those or anything you wanted to point out in specific, Ryan?
Nothing in particular, Mr. Chair. Yep.
With that, then I'll move to public comment section, our final public comment section for the evening. This can be on any topic that you would like to bring before the planning commission. If you would like to speak, you would come up front. We don't have anybody in this room, so if there's anybody online that would like to speak, please raise your hand, introduce yourself, your address, and then limit your comments to 3 minutes or less. Seeing no hands raised on Zoom and none in the room, we will close the second public comment section, which then moves us to the commissioner's comments. Do you have any comments as we'll go around the room? CJ?
I'm gonna pass today.
Mark?
None, thank you.
No,
All right.
no, thank you.
Given the hour, we're going to say none here too. So with that, I will ask, we have a motion to adjourn. And if we can have a second by Anderson. All those in favor?
Yes.
Yes. Opposed? Meeting's adjourned.
I will, yes, I will follow up.
It was so weird. We could talk about it.
So we know how many licenses.